Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to my series of programming with ChatGPT. Today, I will explore a very good use case on how to use ChatGPT, which is creating test cases. And we will give a small introduction about TDD, which is test-driven development. Long story short, it's about writing tests before writing the production code. Now, the way that I'm going to explain it in this video isn't going to be 100% TDD, but it's going to be a very good first step into that. So a lot of times, especially when you work in enterprise company, you'll be requested to write test cases, and especially writing test cases before writing the production code because you want to make sure that your code works as expected. And in many cases, you're not exactly sure what test cases you're supposed to write, how many test cases you can write, and in that case, you can ask ChatGPT to do that for you. So we're going to split this into two parts. One is to ask ChatGPT to create the test cases for us, and the second part is to write the production code that will allow us to pass the test cases. We're going to create a very simple Express API, very similar to what we've done before, creating and getting users. But for writing the production code, we are going to try to do it by ourselves, but we're going to ask ChatGPT to create the test cases for us. That being said, let's jump into it. So this is ChatGPT. I will ask it basically to write test cases for a simple API that creates new users and fetches users using a get endpoint. Can you create test cases for an Express API that has two endpoints? One post endpoint that creates a new user with ID and age, and another get endpoint that retrieves a user by ID. Something that is very simple and very typical, so I'm going to hit enter. And what's really nice about ChatGPT is that it tells you exactly um, like the test cases that you can write and the full explanation of them. And they provide very good examples that sometimes you might not think of, but they make a lot of sense. Now, obviously, I can write those. Now, maybe you would not know how to write those test cases, so why not ask ChatGPT to do that for us? Now, for writing those test cases, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to write them using Jest, which is one of the most well-known like unit tests frameworks for writing test cases in JavaScript. Can you write the above test cases using Jest? Now, typically, when you work in a company, you would use specific like frameworks, specific programming language. So you would like, in my example, I'm using Jest, but in your example, it might be something else. Yeah. And now it's saying a couple of things on how these test cases work. I'm not going to pay too much attention to this. Let's start by writing the node project. The way to do it is basically to run npm init, but for that I'm going to create a directory first. Now, I already covered in the previous videos on how to create a node project. So now the node project is created. It says remember to install the necessary dependencies and configure Jest to run the tests. So let me install both the super test and just. I just want to make sure the syntax is correct. Okay. So while this is installing, let's try to read a little bit. So it's created some test cases for the post, which creates a new users, and some test cases for the get as well. Okay. So it provided us the code, but I'm not exactly sure where to like save this file and how to run the test case using just. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT for that, where to save this test file and how to configure just to run the test cases. Okay. So first it says to save the test file, you can create a new file with a .test.js extension, example this. In the same directory as your Express API files. I didn't create the Express yet. I will do that. And it tells us to install jest. And it tells us to add the following line and then run npm test and also to install supertest. I already installed supertest and I already installed jest. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create this file. So let's do that. And if I scroll all the way up, and there's something I just want to make sure of, which is that, okay, so it's trying to get the Express app from the app file in the same directory. So this looks good. I'm going to save the file. And now I need to create the Express app. I'll just ask it simply how to create the Express app, and then I will modify it to make it pass the test cases. Can you create a sample Express API with a simple inputs? So I'm going to save this as app.js because that's what the test case file is referencing from. And this is sample API that it has a hello world. So I'm going to assume I have to install Express. It's not mentioned here, but since it says require Express, I will install Express first. And while this is installing, there's a step that I forgot to do, which is to add this script um, thing in the package.json. So let me do that quickly. It's already there. I just need to replace it with just. Okay. So now if I run ls, I can see after this JS and the package.json. Okay. Let me just create the Express file quickly. And just to test it, just make sure that it's working as expected. I will run the app.js and I will go to localhost 3000/hello and just basically make sure that the app is working without any issues. So if I click send, it says hello world. So the API is working as expected. So now if I go back and stop the server and try to run the test using npm test, so possibly all the test cases should fail, and I'm expecting that all of them will get some sort of 404 not found, basically because those endpoints do not even exist. So that's my expectation. So all of them failed. And if you can't see, the reason why they are failing is because there is some expectation about the response status, but the received is 404 because the endpoint doesn't even exist, which makes a lot of sense. So I'm going just to click clear quickly, and I just want to remind myself about the test cases. I will start with the get endpoint first. I think it's, or maybe the post endpoint. Okay, let's start with the post endpoint. Should create a new user with a valid ID and age. So it's expecting that if you make a post call to this endpoint, it's going to be saved somehow, and the response set is 200. And the expected response is saying user created successfully. Now, typically you would save this in a database, but we're going to save it in a list just for simplicity. Okay, so let me go to, and before, let me go to my app.js, and I'm going to create my post endpoint. Now, I don't exactly remember how to create a post endpoint, so I'll just ask ChatGPT for an example on how to create a post endpoint. How to create a post endpoint in Express. Now, one thing I noticed on the fly is that it added this Express.json, and this is a sample of a post endpoint. And something that you will notice is that this post was slash users, and the reason why it gave us this exact example is because I'm asking all these questions within the same session. So it has a very good idea on what kind of endpoint I'm asking for, if that makes sense. Yeah. So let's go back. Let's modify the code a little bit. And we don't need the hello endpoint anymore, but I will keep it um, just as a template, but I will modify this later on. And this is the post endpoint. And the endpoint was actually called slash users. And it indeed has ID and age. And I don't remember exactly what was the expected message. So let me save this. Let me just open the test file quickly. So the expected is user created successfully, which is the same message as this one. So everything looks good. And this returns 200 by default. So I'm expecting that the first test case should definitely pass. And if I run this, test case, then if everything makes sense, the first test case should pass, and it indeed passed. Okay? Sorry, wait. I just ran the test cases by mistake. What I wanted to do is I wanted to open the second test case and see what it's supposed to do. It says it should return an error if the ID already exists. And this is the existing ID, and the response is supposed to be 400 because the error ID already exists. So in that case, this data should already be saved. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to save the information in an empty lists instead of a database for simplicity. So now, in order to make sure that all these test cases are running with this information saved, I want to make sure that we make a post call to our API before running our test cases that's going to pass this user so that it's saved in that list. So that being said, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to do that for us. Can you modify the test file so that we make a post call to, to Express API with the existing ID user before our tests? Yeah. So as you can see, it shows here before all, and it makes this post request with its existing ID. Okay, that makes sense. So let's copy this line and let's go to our test case. And yeah, it seems to make sense. Now, the second thing that I'm going to do, even if I did this, this thing is still going to fail because we still didn't get our empty list. So let's do that in our app.js, and then let's try to run the test cases again. Let user, this is an empty list, and when we create a new user, what we are supposed to do is user list.push request.body. I'm basically creating a new user in our user list. But before doing that, because of the second test case, we don't want to create a new user if it already exists in the database or exists in our list in our simple test case. So I don't exactly remember how to filter or find a user in a user list by an ID. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT for that. How to find a user in a user list for a specific ID. Here it provided us with a very good example, and this is the find user by ID. Okay, looks very simple to me. So let's go back and let's create this custom function. Now, obviously, you would usually not add this in the same file, but this is just a very simple API, so that should be fine. And now, let's use it before trying to push and save the information in our as a response back. So now find user by ID, but now the ID is the ID from the request body. Now, if the user is not undefined, or in another word, if we were able to find the user, it means that the user already exists, which is in that case, we're supposed to return status 400 with a response of user already exists. But let me just confirm the exact error message based on our test case. So this is, let me copy that. Now let me go back to edit my app.js, return response.status 400.json, and this is the expected JSON response, I think. Hopefully I didn't make any mistake, but let's test that and find out. Okay. Now we're going to run our tests. So now it says 2 test cases have passed, and I'm expecting the first 2 test cases have passed indeed. So now let's go to the next test case, right? So the next test case is saying should return an error if the age is invalid, which makes sense because the age is not supposed to be negative. And in that case, we're supposed to return this error message, and the status code is supposed to be 400. So again, the same thing. We're going to go to our app.js. We can say if age is less or equal to 0, which wouldn't make sense. In that case, we want to return a response of 400 with the following response body, which is invalid age format. Now let's run our test cases again. And now we made 3 test cases pass. Again, let's go to the next one. Should return an error if the age is missing. Okay. So let's do that. And as you can see, it gets repetitive, it gets easier. So if the age is undefined, I think. I'm not sure if it's undefined or null. I always get confused between them, but if this didn't work out, then we can check the age using a different way. Okay, so 4 test cases have passed. 3 are remaining, which is for the get endpoint. Now, obviously, all of them are returning 404 because it's not even created. So I'm not exactly sure how to add an ID as a path variable to Express. So I'll briefly going to ask ChatGPT for that. How to create a get endpoint with a path variable, for example, ID. And again, as I told you before, it's smart enough to know that I'm asking for a user ID because I'm speaking with ChatGPT on the same chat session. Okay. And there's some explanation, but since this is part 5, I already have an idea of what this all means. So let's copy this, and then we will modify it based on our use case. I'm going to delete the hello endpoint because we don't need that anymore. And I think I copied some repetitive code. 1 second. Now the find user by ID is already there, so I'll just move this function. Example user list, I don't need that. And as you can see, this is how to get a user by user ID. This is how to get the ID using the request.params. And this is how to get the user. It says if the user exists, we'll return the user, otherwise we'll return follow for user not found. So I think this is going to pass at least one or two test cases. Let's see. So I'm going to save this, and then we're going to run the test cases again. And something has failed. Let's see why it failed. Yeah, there's a repetition because I copied the code incorrectly. So let's go back to app.js. And now I think this should be fine. Let's try to run this again. And now six test cases have passed. We only have one remaining. Should return an error if the ID param is missing. Okay, that's an interesting one. I'm going to assume that if this will happen, if this happened, the ID is going to be undefined. So let's see if that's the case. If ID equal undefined, return dot status. I'm going to assume 400. I didn't read it correctly, but this would be a bad request, right? I think. And now let's save this and let's run the test cases again. And this has failed. This has failed. Hmm. I see. Okay. So it says the expected is 400, but we received 404. I see. Because when we passed slash user slash, it didn't refer to the endpoint that we created because it assumes that the ID is already there. Now we can create an endpoint that says slash user slash and just return 400. So that's a solution. But I'm just trying to think if there's a better way to do it. So now just for the duration of this video, just to make it not very long, I'll just create another endpoint, but I have a feeling that there's an easier way to do it. So let's go back to app.js. I'll just copy this part because I'm going to use it. And now return response.status. And I hope this should be correct. I'm not exactly certain. Wait, there's a I need to add this. I think this should be fine, but I'm not certain. Let's run our test cases. And now all the test cases have passed. Now we might see this warning because jest is supposed to to exit after all the test cases have passed instead of running all the time. Now I don't remember how to fix this, but I've seen this before and it's extremely easy to fix, but it's not part of this video objective, so I will not care much about that. Now we can test using Postman just to make sure that everything is actually working as expected. So if I land um, node app.js, so if I said users, let's start with this one. This should fail because the ID parameter is missing, right? See? Let's try to fetch a user that doesn't exist. 5454, user not found. Now let's try to create a user, and this should be the endpoint. And if I went to the body, I can go to raw, I can go to JSON, and the ID is test1, age is 25, for example. Now if I click send, user created successfully. Now if I try to send the same user with the same ID, I should get an error, if you remember. So I'm going to click send again. ID already exists. Now if I try to fetch that user, let me just move this temporarily. Now we're able to fetch the user. So yeah, this was a very simple, useful use case for ChatGPT. Now in the future videos, I will start providing more complex examples and more advanced examples. Um, I'm thinking of posting and talking about Docker and pipelines in the next videos, and then go from there. Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed this video and you found it useful, and have a nice day. Bye bye.